Now, before we begin with the communication strategy, okay, you need to understand certain things, certain points that I will talk about now. Okay. Now, firstly, there are three levels of planning. Okay. The discussion so far has remained at a relatively simple level, right? Treating planning as if it were a single process. Okay. But now we are going to inquire more deeply into the different kinds of planning to be done in order to achieve effective system adaptation. Planners face three related but separable tasks. Okay, they must organize themselves to plan, right? They must plan for action, okay, and they must learn more about how they plan and what they plan so they can improve, right? So each of these challenges requires the application of rational thought and knowledge, hence the elements of ASDAL, right? And this is thus a form of planning within an overall planning process. For convenience sake, we will call these component planning process levels and give them names. Okay, let's name them as planning to plan, planning to act, and planning to learn. Okay, so let's move with the first level. Okay, planning to plan. Okay, so most practicing planners recognize immediately that they are part of an identifiable subsystem within their organization. In larger, more complex organizations, this subsystem may even be formally recognized as the planning branch, division, or office. Okay, in smaller or less complex organizations, without formally designated planning subsystems, individuals will often create a temporary planning subsystem at certain intervals, often for a specific duration, during which time they plan more and carry out other kinds of duties less. Okay. In yet a third general type of situation, planning is a fully ongoing process, completely integrated with the other actions of people in a system. This too tends to be found in smaller, less complex organizations. Even in this third type of situation, people will be able to distinguish their planning tasks from other kinds of work. As we discussed earlier, the larger system puts something of value into the environment in return for resources. This input output relationship is the system's adaptation strategy. The planning subsystem draws resources both from the task environment and from the larger system itself. Okay, money and people are important resources to the planning subsystem. Okay, information and knowledge are also important because they make it possible for the subsystem to plan successfully at all three levels: to plan, to act, and to learn. The planning subsystem produces outputs for the larger system. We can conveniently think of these outputs as plans as long as we recognize that the term includes all forms of information useful in the adaptation of the larger system. Okay, so planning to plan is the conscious effort to adapt the planning subsystem to the larger system and to the task environment. There are many different approaches to planning. Okay, to achieve successful adaptation to the system in which they work and to be most effective in planning for the adaptation of the larger system to its environment, planners must develop an approach to planning which fits their system and their environment. Because systems and environments are different and change over time, it is not surprising to find that there are several different ways to plan. Correct? So, very often a planning approach evolves through history and experience in response to a system and its environment. This evolutionary process, however, can be strengthened by making it an explicit part of planning. Thus, it is possible to think about planning to plan using the elements of ASDAL. Okay? Now, the next is analysis. Okay, analysis, that is understanding systems and environment. Okay, now an effective planning approach is one which rests on understanding of the key factors in the system in the task environment, right? So three of the key categories of knowledge, okay, of this type are discussed. Okay, let me just go ahead with them. Okay, social image, one of the categories. Okay, now planners make conscious efforts to adapt their system effectively to the environment so that its goals can be achieved, yet the environment is constantly changing. Adaptation comes through planning the run with constant attention to what future environments will be. So, a central intellectual problem in planning to plan is projecting the nature, direction, and pace of social change. Predictions of this type rest on the fundamental image of society held by planners, policymakers, influential people, and citizens in general. So, we can call this the social image, and it determines much of how systems are structured and how power is allocated and used. It has bearing on what means are considered acceptable in achieving goals, and of course on the selection of goals themselves. Now three contrasting types of social image have been identified as relevant to planning. Okay, the firstly being control. Society consists of integrated and stable systems or institutions. Okay, there is emphasis on controlled, orderly change. Right now, the second type is consensus. Okay, now society exists as bargaining and conflict among competing groups, institutions, or systems. There is emphasis on conflict containment and resolution and on the balancing of conflicting demands. Correct? Third is the radical change. Society is in conflict, for example, between social classes. Okay, there is increased class consciousness, struggle, and radical transformation of society. These views of society rest on assumptions about the way in which power is to be used in society and how change is to take place. Individual and social values play important roles, both in the selection of goals for change and in the choice of means or strategies to achieve these goals. An important difference among the three types of images is the degree of participation in planning, which fits well with each image. Okay, now let us take a society where the control image is widely held. Okay, many developing countries actually operate with this image. Okay, this is just good to know information. Planners there would be guiding the adaptation of systems which have a great deal of centralized power. There would be a high value on gradual and orderly change. There would probably be little pressure within the system to expand participation in planning, although if the control image were not widely held in the society, there might be some demand for participation from the task environment. Planners would probably see participation, for example, of key officials and village leaders, primarily as a way to get information and to get people to agree with plans in order to strengthen implementation. Okay, in a society with consensus image, things might be quite different. Okay, power would be shared by a number of competing groups and agencies. A key problem in planning would be that of establishing a power base through bargaining and negotiation with other agencies. Change goals would also be worked out through bargaining and competition. The participation of various groups and individuals in planning might be essential to achieving power and support. In a consensus society, there is likely to be considerable ideological support for participation as a good thing in itself, and the planners are likely to share these values. Okay, when the social image is of radical change, participation in political action to restructure society might be a central means of acting and, in effect, be required of citizens. Systems complexity.